Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle King. I'm the Managing Director of Capacity Building National, and welcome back to actually our final webinar for 2021. So it's been an entire year of webinars, and we are now going to be wrapping these up. Today, we are going to have the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure with us today, which is a very interesting organization, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentation and learning more about what CDRI is doing and how it can impact all of us. So, of course, joining me today, as you guys mentioned, my name is Kyle King, and we are joined today by, of course, Harold Drager, President of TEAMS, the International Emergency Management Society, and, of course, Mr. Sameer Pethe. Did I say your name correctly, Sameer?
It's Pethe.
Pethe. Okay, thank you very much. So, but first, before we get started, as I mentioned, this is getting towards the end of the year. This is our final webinar for this year, and we have had 23 events this year with 1,757 attendees in 72 nations. And actually, we're over 1,800 now because of the number of registrations for people attending today from this series, from this webinar today. And so just a few quick points. Again, in the chat, just let us know where you are joining us from. And of course, as we normally do with all the webinars, that use the Q&A, because that's a great place for us to be able to record the questions for later on if we want to answer them. If we don't have a chance to get to them, we can still have the questions and run the reports accordingly, and then follow up with via email. So that's always available. You'll find the Q&A feature down on the toolbar for Zoom, and just use that as well. And we'll get to them towards the end of the webinar and the presentation from Sameer, and use those at the end. Now, we are closing out the event on LinkedIn for this year because we've had that open for the entire year. You know, that was not really sort of what it was organized to be. I think when LinkedIn was thinking about these events, they were thinking sort of a one-off event. But now we've had it open the entire year, as you can see there, from March to December. And really great, a lot of support in terms of having 355 people following that event on LinkedIn. And now that we're closing out that event towards the end of this year, make sure you follow both CBI and TEAMS on social media to stay updated on LinkedIn and other forums, and also CDRI. And we'll find out more about them here in just a second. Now, so today, Sameer is going to be joining us and talking to us about CDRI, and I will turn it over to you. And I'm very interested, and we'll just start with a quick introduction, Sameer, and then certainly ready for your presentation.
Thanks a lot. So I'm Sameer Pethe. I'm the Senior Specialist Projects at CDRI, and I'm currently handling the Power Sector Program as well as Building Back Resilient Program. My background is one from emergency management. So I've been a humanitarian worker from 2011 to 2017, after which I switched to writing policy work. So I joined the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. And there I started working on the concept of CDRI. So I was part of the task force, the authors of the task force report that led to the creation of CDRI. And so I've been working on this since then. So I hope to be able to answer whatever doubts people may have on CDRI. CDRI was launched at the UN Climate Action Summit on 23rd September 2019 by the Prime Minister of India. So we are a multi-stakeholder partnership of national governments, UN agencies, multilateral banks, financing institutions, private sector, and academia, and set up with the aim of working towards enabling resilience of disaster and climate resilience of infrastructure systems. We have we work on global, regional, and local knowledge. We're set up in order to share. So we are basically members of our coalition are country governments, international organizations, and the private sector. So the whole intention of working on this field is to share knowledge amongst countries in order to build up infrastructure systems that are resilient to disasters and climate change. So we are an inclusive and multi-stakeholder platform managed by national governments. We focus on all the life cycle of infrastructure systems, and all of our work will be aligned with the SDGs, climate action, and Sendai framework. So currently we have 28 member countries. The map and list is on the screen. I'll leave it there for a second. And we have, apart from that, 5 international organizations and 2 private sector organizations, which I will list after this. So amongst the CDRI international organizations and private sector, we have ADB, World Bank, European Union, CCRI, DRR, UNDP, and Arise Network. So this membership is constantly expanding. We're getting new members every month. So in terms of governance arrangements, CDRI is headed by a governing council that has members from all of the, uh, so representatives from all of the members. And we have a 10-member executive committee that meets a little more often in order to take shorter term decisions. And we are headed by a director general at the CDRI secretariat. So the first governing council meeting happened right before the pandemic hit, and the second governing council meeting happened. These have been happening remotely, but the last executive committee meeting that we had, we were able to hold it in a hybrid mode. So CDRI basically works on three program areas. There's technical support and capacity building, research and knowledge management, and advocacy and partnerships. So this is how this is sort of a overview of the entire work areas that we have. So in terms of sectors, we are working on power, telecom, transport, health, and urban. We've selected these. So originally we had started off working only on power, telecom, and transport because these sectors, so investment in building the resilience of these sectors would have the maximum multiplier effect in terms of reducing the impacts of disasters. And so with the COVID pandemic and in consultation with the members, we added two more sector programs for health and urban infrastructure. So cutting through these sectoral programs, we have thematic programs on disaster risk financing, capacity building and training, nature-based solutions, standards and certification, infrastructure governance, and early warning systems. So these sort of cut across all of the sectors, and so we're working with exploring areas of work in all of these themes also. And then we have some multi-sectoral projects that cut across all of this to bring it together. So I'll get to those in a while. So I'll tell you all about the sectoral programs, thematic programs, and multi-sector projects. So coming to the sectoral programs, we started off our work on the power sector in 2019 when Cyclone Fani hit the state of Orissa in India. It caused massive damages to the power sector, and this was the perfect opportunity to start working with somebody. So we have been cooperating with the Orissa Department of Power, and we've launched a 3-phase study that's basically working towards improving the overall resilience of the power system, which includes disaster management practices, so response, recovery, reconstruction of the assets. We are doing a detailed risk assessment to develop, to compare and benchmark the standards that are being used in Orissa against the actual threats that are being faced in the state. And the last section of the study will be looking at the governance, policy, capacity building, knowledge management, and financing aspects of building this. So the end product will be a roadmap that the state can follow in order to improve all of their systems and also make arrangements for financing them. In this, we also issued an advisory to coastal states last year, coastal states and cyclone affected countries, where basically like a short advisory for power sector on how to prepare for upcoming cyclones. We're also developing programs in Fiji and Mauritius, which are still under discussion. So coming to the transport program, we're doing two types of work right now. So one is a national risk and resilience assessment for roads. We are starting off this work in India and also developing a national risk and resilience assessment for Mauritius. So we basically want to determine performance measures for road network resilience in 3 member countries. Coming to the study on airports, so we are doing a 2-phase study. One, we'll be looking at 150 airports around the world to sort of draw out the typologies of the kind of problems that are being faced by airports worldwide with regard to natural hazards. And then the second phase of the study will be a deep dive into examining specific issues that are identified in phase one from the wider survey. In telecom, also we are doing a national risk and resilience assessment of the telecom sector in India. So we have two studies already started, which one is a sub-national assessment inside India of 4 states of the country, and another one is on like studying at national level, studying 3 or 4 member countries. So India would be one of them, but Mauritius, Fiji, and Nepal is where we'll be rolling out the study. For the health sector, we basically uh, we held a webinar on how like recovery after the pandemic, building a resilient health infrastructures and supply chain. This was held in 17 December last year. And apart from that, we also developed a working paper on the sort of infrastructure and supply chain requirements, upgrades required in India in case of a third wave of the COVID pandemic. So what we would have to do in advance. In urban, we are doing a global study of 20 cities. Similar to the airport study, we'll be doing a cross-sectional study in order to identify key themes and then also identify how we can partner with our member countries based on these themes. So this will help us to initiate further work. And there's a specific study in Cuttack, again in the same state of Orissa where the power sector study is going on, where we'll be basically assessing the urban infrastructure resilience of the city of Cuttack. Coming to the thematic programs, we are working on developing capacity building and training programs. So that would be the long-term aim, but in the short term, we're developing short-term courses with academic institutions, and secondly, we're also doing an overall analysis of what are the capacity building mechanisms and methods followed by various infrastructure sectors in various countries, and then finding out where the gaps are in terms of inclusion of the concept of resilience or disaster preparedness, and also improvement of standards, etc. So that sort of mapping is ongoing right now at the Secretariat. In terms of finance, again, we've launched 2 studies, one subnational and one multi-country. The first study that we've launched is a fiscal risk assessment study, which will basically identify what is the funding gap for infrastructure recovery. And so what sort of impact countries and states are facing because of natural hazards, and then projecting that into the future with some modeling and climate, including climate change projections, in order to basically identify what sort of funding would be required in the future, and then suggesting some tools based on the current financial system of the state. We're proposing tools that states could use or countries could use in order to bridge that gap. Another project we are working on is with the National Infrastructure Pipeline of India, where we'll be appraising policy documents and seeing where we could include concepts of requirements for resilience, etc., in the standard contracts that are being signed for EPC style construction of the infrastructure in the pipeline. So in terms of standards and certification, we are still exploring the space. There is a lot of work already being done on this. So currently, we are priority focusing again on power, telecom, and transport. We've held 2 webinars on this, and we are in the process of developing more partnerships through ISO and others in order to enter the space and see how CDRI could make a better impact. On the side, we also keep the NBS theme alive, because it's very important that we start that future infrastructure starts to integrate working with nature in order to build resilience rather than the olden style infrastructure systems. So we're also working on early warning systems and infrastructure governance. Under early warning, we are starting discussion with coastal states actually in India on how we can work with the IMD and the meteorological department and the line departments in the state in order to maybe bridge the gap between how the early warnings are being communicated and whether they're in a form that is useful to the state, for the infrastructure managers. And so we are planning to establish a decision support system that would help the managers on field take faster action based on early warning, dependable early warning. And in the governance space, we've developed a white paper on governance for resilience with Resilient Shift and Arup. And we are also working in the state of Sikkim in India to develop a DRI, disaster resilient infrastructure roadmap. And lastly, coming to the multi-sectoral projects. So there is the CDRI's biennial flagship report. So this is a report on the global status of the global infrastructure on its climate and disaster resilience. So this will be the flagship report of CDRI, bringing together all of the work that we're doing. It has 5 pillars. It will carry out a global risk and resilience assessment of infrastructure systems. We'll design an index through which we will benchmark and measure the resilience of various infrastructure systems. Third pillar will be a thematic section which will change in every publication. This one is on nature-based solutions. Pillar 4 will report actually. So a lot of the SDGs and Sendai achievement depends on us constructing and making our infrastructure systems resilient. Because till we do that, we won't be able to reduce losses, especially economic losses around the world. And so, Pillar 4 will be reporting specifically on infrastructure sectors and their contribution to various global targets. In terms of resilience. And lastly, Pillar 5, which will deal with finance for climate resilient infrastructure. So what is the state and what is the various funding available and mechanisms. So Pillar 5 will be looking into that. Apart from that, we have set projects on learning from disasters. We are planning to set up labs. We have programs that are dealing with the youth. So there's a young professional program. There's also annual competition. Ongoing youth engagement program called Youth for Resilient Infrastructure. And we also have a fellowship program. So last year's fellowship awarded 21 fellowships to people from 12 countries. And so basically these are aimed towards funding research or practice related projects for 1 year. And they have to be, there are certain parameters on which they will be judged, but basically relating to improving resilience of infrastructure. We are also in the process of developing a platform called DRI Connect, which will basically be a culmination of a knowledge portal, like a web-based portal for accessing knowledge. Second, a marketplace where we plan to help our member countries to access services and maybe even goods and services relating to resilient infrastructure. And this platform is under development. And lastly, part of the same platform will be a community of practice, bringing together professionals such as are present on this call and engaging them in conversation about their specific sectors or their specific work. Lastly, coming to the annual conference. So CDRI has been hosting it used to be called the IWDRI, which is the International Workshop on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. But after the establishment, so we did one in 2018 and 2019. Then 2019 September, we were launched. So then after that, the 2020 version couldn't happen because of COVID. But then we had ICDRI, so we've renamed it the International Conference on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And this time's opening session was chaired by 4 prime ministers, as you can see on screen. We had about 78 speakers, 1,250 attendees from 100 countries. And we also had a side events where through the platform that we were using for the online event, we set up a marketplace where vendors got to meet the participants of the conference. And also we had a masterclass on urban resilience in collaboration with UNDRR and I think, University of Oxford. So lastly, coming to most recent events, so CDRI was at COP. We had quite a few events there. We also launched a smaller facility that, so basically it's called the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, IRIS. This will basically be aimed at building the resilience of the most vulnerable small island developing countries, and working specifically on the issues there. So uh, this work will not be limited to members of CDRI. All 58 SIDS countries are welcome and will be engaged through this process. Apart from that, we also hosted events on finance, on power, and on the IRIS event itself. Yeah, so IRIS was launched at the World Leaders Summit by the Prime Ministers of UK, India, Australia, Fiji, Jamaica, and Mauritius. And it's the initiative is currently being, I mean, in advanced stages of being co-created along with SID stakeholders. And we're already seeing interest from donors to contribute, or there have already been commitments at the event for funding this facility that will work for small island countries. So thank you very much. I hope everyone wasn't too bored.
Thank you, Sameer. So we do have one question, and I think it's a good question. So would it be accurate to characterize CDRI as a research and advisory body composed of states and international institutions? And therefore, by extension, is it accurate to say that CDRI informs national or international policy on climate disaster resilience, but does not make it?
Yes, but we also do technical support projects. So apart from just research and knowledge, so we're generating some knowledge also through our technical support programs. But otherwise, yes, everything else you said was correct.
Okay. And a question from my side. So when you had mentioned working with ISO and other things, and there's a lot of sort of complications in terms of generating international consensus, especially in terms of getting national policy to align with more, let's say, international best practices and things like that. What are some of the challenges you see from a CDRI perspective, especially when dealing with infrastructure? It's so resource intensive and it requires significant investment. That's the first question. I've got a couple more after that, but that's the first question of, so how do you see it in terms of challenges to CDRI to try and build that consensus to change national policy?
So that's where the main challenge is there, where governments basically lead the way in terms of infrastructure development. So that is the crux, the core of the idea is to work with governments so that we can change policy that then downstream changes everything else. The challenge is currently, so CDRI right now doesn't have much of a base of its own. So we are right now exploring collaborations. We're working with other organizations, like so exploring collaborations with, for example, the early, regional early action partnership for REAP, for instance, for early warning systems. We're working with. So we have launched. How do I put this? Basically, I have. The few projects that we have initiated are going to be the sort of showcasing our ability to do some have some impact, and so those we will leverage in order to move forward. But in terms of just the events that we've held and the advocacy work that we've done, we are seeing already countries like Mauritius, Fiji, Chile, Mongolia, and Nepal we've already begun conversations with them. And the difference here is that we're not working with the national disaster management authorities. Instead, we're working with the infrastructure line ministries. So the work that is going on in terms of the global advocacy on in COP, etc. This is having an impact in terms of making people, the governments also curious about, or having setting targets towards achieving climate resilience. So adaptation has been a big theme in this time's COP, and that is exactly what we're talking about: climate adaptation and basically disaster risk reduction. So climate basically translates to climate shock would be a disaster. So that in that sense, we are already working on the extreme shocks that could be created by climate change. So this whole so thanks to the COP, I would say and the commitments made at these high level events, we are now able to speak much more easily with the departments. They're showing an interest. They've set their national governments have set up or made commitments or set up plans for national adaptation plans. So we are trying to so whether it's easier to start the conversation now with line departments who now know at least which direction to head in. And so that has been a positive. The challenge is also we are still in sort of startup mode. We have limited capacity. So in terms of like we're still expanding our the secretariat and its capacities in order to reach out to more people and do more work. So all this has been we have quite a small staff, and you can see the wide variety of work that we're already doing. So yeah, I think we're still in the initial stages, and I think it's going to there is a lot of traction. So yeah, the challenge is galore, but yeah, hopefully.
Well, I mean, of course, I mean, but the challenges are enormous when you're trying to work at the international level. So we got a couple more questions here, and I'll just go right over to those. So on nature-based solutions, what are the plans of CDRI in the context of the UNEP announcing 2021 to 2031, basically the next decade, as the UN decade for ecosystem restoration?
So CDRI has identified nature-based solutions as a theme even before this announcement, and our work basically, so there are these cross-cutting themes, like nature would be one cross-cutting theme. We plan to integrate it into every conversation that we're having, like whether we're working on transport, even if you're working on power where or telecom where the relation is lower, but we are um, basically this is our understanding is that working with nature is going to contribute towards reduction in cost of infrastructure and also building resilience. So in a way it sort of features in all of our across our work.
Okay, interesting. Thanks. And there's a question in chat here. I'll just go ahead and go over to that one. So in India, have you developed prioritization criteria for the investments in the reconstruction and or maintenance of bridge management systems? And second part to that is, are disaster risk management sub-criteria included along with other criteria like social and environmental or financial and economic /BCA?
So as far as I'm aware, no, I don't think we have a fully developed system on prioritization for investments and on bridge maintenance systems exactly. So I don't think we're there yet. And in terms of sub-criteria for risk management, that project that I mentioned about the National Infrastructure Pipeline, what we're trying to do is, so this National Infrastructure Pipeline is just a vehicle for bringing together good infrastructure projects in India for investment from all over. So this body, along with the central planning body Niti Aayog, they have standardized templates that are being used across infrastructure systems, like the model contractual agreements and other standardized contracts that are being signed while awarding work. So what we are doing is we're going to analyze all of these standardized documents, and like criteria for environmental impact assessment were added earlier on. So like that, we hope to be able to get India to include some parameters on the resilience, so indicators of resilience into those standardized contracts, thereby then affecting virtually possibly all of the contracts being signed downstream. So that is a kind of way that we're approaching this inclusion of sub-criteria on resilience. So infrastructure sectors currently don't have, so they don't have benchmarks on, so they have their own safety standards, and based on historic understanding of the risk of the area, there are engineering standards, but not in terms of performance criteria, and not taking into account that the climate's going to get worse. So these things need to be done.
Interesting, thanks. And so, what are CDRI's plans for increasing its membership count from 29 countries, which is a significant number, to more active engagement with national governments?
Mm, so this, I mean, right now we are seeing interest from new countries all the time. So we recently added Ghana, Brazil, and these are just within the last 2 months. And so I think the small island developing states, the SIDS facility, IRIS, this is going, so it'll be like a subdivision of CDRI, but it will have its own facilities and office. And we plan to get secondments from SIDS countries to come and work in this office. So basically, CDRI and its members will be funding this separate facility. But we hope that the work through this really attracts a lot more members from countries that are at the forefront of climate change, and really for them infrastructure resilience is like a existential issue. So that is one. But apart from that, our constantly, so there's webinars, there's the annual conference, we're inviting all of our networks. So last year, I think to the conference we invite a lot more countries, and I think the traction we originally gained because of the membership from like a lot of G20 countries. So people, found out about us and have been approaching us consistently for membership. It's not. I mean, all of our work is going to push towards getting more members and making this actually international, global.
Yeah, definitely. And positive trends, I think, too.
Yes.
So another question we have is on health infrastructure. So, what are CDRI's plans given the overwhelming expectations given by the experience of the 221 countries which are impacted by a global pandemic?
So, CDRI's work specifically focuses on the built infrastructure more than the systems. So, I feel that so we did a lot of research into how we could work on the effects of the pandemic, and there's two parts. One, there's the discussion on how infrastructure investment is being used as a vehicle for economic and national recovery after COVID. So that is one side, and we are engaging with people to sort of push the message that this massive infrastructure push would have to also be resilient, or else we're locking in risky infrastructure and it's going to fail. And so that's one side of the conversation. The other one is on actual health infrastructure. So this really depends on so there's the building itself, the hospital building, which needs to be, so there are countries where risk assessment and construction practices aren't really advanced. So so we'll have to start from approaching them at that level. But apart from that, there's the resilience of supply chains. And so, for example, India faced massive shortages of oxygen. And so these kind of emergency supplies, the supply chain also needs to be resilient, so that if faced with such situations, we don't face shortages. So there is the whole supply chain angle, logistics, less on the actual internal clinical procedures or stuff relating to hospitals, but more about the supplies, materials, and building resilience. So there could be complex situations where a hazard hits while you're also in the middle of a pandemic wave, which has happened in India last year also. So there's a lot of work to be done in those regions, but there's a lot of it is also about health systems, and that's we're not touching those, more towards the hardware side.
Right. Interesting. And so, if somebody wanted to find out more about CDRI, or if even if they were working at a government institution, how would they contact CDRI? How would they get involved in some of these programs?
So we have a website and Twitter and LinkedIn page. I think, yeah, LinkedIn. So we're constantly putting out stuff that we're doing there. Our website has contact address. I mean, so ways to contact us. Apart from that, so in terms of membership, it's a pretty simple process. So the CDRI is not a treaty-based organization; it's a charter-based organization. So all countries have to do is to endorse the charter of CDRI officially, and they become a member. So at the time of membership, there's no obligation on the country to contribute financially or anything. The charter says that we'll all come together to work in kind and through monetary contribution in order to push this whole agenda of infrastructure resilience. So, in a sense, I mean, we are trying to target. We're looking at it as not just take knowledge from advanced countries and pass it on to like developing countries, but more also trying to get advanced countries to sort of have discussions with each other. So one interesting session we had in one of the previous conferences, the last in-person conference, was a session where basically advanced countries were presenting to each other. So, for example, issues faced in terms of cold in Canada. Canada is really putting a lot of effort into getting their infrastructure resilient to cold. So there are other Northern European countries and North America in general where such knowledge is useful, and it's not knowledge that is available in any other context. So that session was really interesting for me to attend because it's the first time I'm watching. Advanced countries sort of help each other out on issues that are very relevant to them, and so that's another. So South-South collaboration, North-North collaboration, everything through the same platform. That's we're trying.
That's great. No, that's very interesting. Sharing the knowledge is critically important. And can you explain, so what do you mean by countries have to endorse the charter? So is it a formal ratification, a declaration from a ministry, or some other form? I mean, because some people do work, say, at a ministerial level or at a department level, would like to participate, but does it have to go through that entire political process, for example?
I don't know. I'm not clear about the exact political process that goes. So, but this is not a treaty. So it's not a formal legal instrument that you are signing. So we've mostly got membership application, so sort of letters of endorsing the charter through the ministries of external affairs, where either through the embassy here or from the country there, the external affairs ministry writes to us saying that we endorse the charter and we'd like to be part of. So our main points of contact, the focal points are all sitting in the embassies here in Delhi. So we communicate through there, but then we also quickly, so whichever countries we started working in, we immediately get the embassy person to get us in touch with the ministries. So there are many countries who have now ministries of climate change. So the strategy so far, and I think the way it has gone, is that either the disaster management ministry or organization or the climate change ministry or organization has basically expressed interest in joining CDRI, and then the Ministry of External Affairs or I'm not really clear about the internal process in other countries in order to endorse, but there's no legal binding nature to our charter, so it doesn't have those. It doesn't have to go through that many levels of clearance. But apart from that, so there are people contacting us to start working. So we would like to start engaging with the infrastructure ministries, even if they're not member countries. Our governance process that way doesn't exclude non-member countries. It's just membership has been made easy so that we can then start, bring these into the mainstream plans of CDRI.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I mean, in sort of adopting the charter or endorsing the charter, agreeing to the charter is just one process, which wouldn't require sort of ratification, formal ratification and legislation. However, it does require some aspect of the political endorsement, because if it's going to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and things like that. So there is that sort of diplomatic aspect that'll have to be considered as well. Harold.
Hello, Sameer. I enjoyed very much listening to your presentation. And I wonder, we were now discussing membership, and Teams is an NGO, international NGO. Could we become a member, or are we not that type of organization which can be a member of CDRI?
So I don't think there's a problem with the type of organization, but the way that we've set it up, we will always have 2/3 member countries and 1/3 organizations. And the list which organizations, so member countries approach, so potential countries, they approach us directly to seek membership, whereas the organizations are invited to apply. So the member countries will decide together which organizations we should invite onto the governing council. So that's how all the 7.
Yeah, well, I will have. We have an international organization with the regional directors, and Vinod Men in India is actually our regional director for Asia. So I will have him to look into what kind of relationship can we develop with CDRI.
Sure. We're also getting into signing memorandums of understanding with other international organizations, so that even if they're not formal members, we can start working, define some common themes, aims, and start working together. That's not going to stop us.
Looks good. Thank you.
And so there's a couple of quick points here. So just to confirm, so maybe Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the first step for those that want to join CDRI, and then later the competent ministries in that functional area. So whether that's climate, crisis management. Does that sound about right, Sameer?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I hope that helps answer your question. Okay, next one I think is really interesting. I want to read it because it came from the chat, and it basically says, more than enough info in IPCC reports to implement mitigation and adaptation measures for everybody. Need to get confirmation that mitigation and adaptation are indeed working and addressing climate change. We have no such information. Do you have any comments about that? And before you do answer, I want to be able to say that I think that's critically important, because if we're talking about evidence-based, sort of solutions, I think that's critical to be able to understand that, is this actually working, before we invest money in it.
So the comment I can make on this is basically for infrastructure development inside the context of possibly changing climate and seeing how we are responding to it. The strategy would be like using more robust strategies that are more short term. So there are certain risks, and you at least definitely prepare for those. And you also build systems that are not only, so like when we talk about bringing in nature-based systems, nature-based solutions, etc., there is the co-benefits of developing infrastructure. So instead of solving only one problem, for example, road networks with cycling tracks and running tracks and tree cover. So if this is a form of adaptation strategy, then you're not going to really, it's called a no regret strategy. You're not going to, even if the climate impacts or the climate projections don't play out the way that they are, there will still be multiple benefits to developing infrastructure in that way. But commenting specifically on like confirmation that mitigation adaptation are working, that we're going to see in terms of results in actually being able to save our infrastructure. So if we don't adapt fast enough and we don't get ready for increased climate variability, then we are going to see failures of infrastructure systems, and that in fact affects a lot more lives. So it's really important to work on these long-term investments also.
Okay,
I
thank you,
hope I've
Sameer. I think that
answered
was
the question.
yeah, I think that. Thank you for that. I think that was a great way to end up the webinar. That we do need to invest in order to preserve the infrastructure and critical systems. Before we move on, Harold, I skipped you before we opened up. So if you wanted to sort of help us close out the session today, if you had any closing remarks, then I'll sort of give an idea of what we're looking at for next year. So just over to you, Harold.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. It was interesting to listening to Sameer, and as I said, we will see if we can get a closer relationship some way. We are a different kind of organization, but we are quite international, and we do a lot of research, which I think could fit very well in with what CDRI is doing. And actually, we have started looking at what should we do next year, and teams participate in the EU projects, and we have just now entered 2 new projects about wildfire or landscaping, actually the whole process of preventing nature. And I think they can be interested. We had a kickoff meeting actually today on the web, and I think, Kyle, that we will ask both Firelog and FireS, which is the name of these projects, to do presentations. And we hopefully also get in more countries, more organizations like CDRI. So I think we have a lot of things to fill into the program next year. So that would, I think we can even get more, we should have more countries, but also more type of technology within the emergency management field. So that's my thoughts for next year, but I'm sure that Kyle, you have a lot of ideas yourself, and Kyle has now also on the team's board, so we can even discuss this more, how we reach more out. So I hope to cooperate more with you, Sameer, and the CDRI organization. Thank you.
Thank you. We definitely welcome the collaboration.
So before we close out, I just want to kind of cover what's next, because this is the closing session of 2021 after all these different webinars, and we've learned quite a bit from this process, and not only talked to just a number of different national representatives, and we've discussed different models and things like that. What we are looking forward or towards too in 2022 is we are going to divide things a little bit. So we're going to start launching a podcast where we're going to discuss more thematic issues in depth with professionals like Sameer and others, and have that sort of discussion so people can listen to that. And then our webinar series will continue. We are going to be focusing on national models, right? So we want to continue that discussion, just like Sameer was even mentioning. It's good to have that discussion where we learn from other experiences and learn how different ways and different organizations and national models are functioning and working and things like that. And so that's something that we're going to continue with. And of course, the team's annual conference is coming up in 2022, and that is now currently planned to be in cooperation with the Emergency Management Institute in the United States, which is under the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So that's currently the plan for that as well, and more to be announced. So more is coming up as well. And so that is what's going to be happening next. And in terms of that, that's really about it for today. Harold, anything else that we have to say?
No, I enjoyed it very much, and I will wish everybody a happy Christmas and a prosperous New Year.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending, and we will see you in the new year. Sameer, thanks again. Best of luck to you, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you.